What's happening, everybody? Welcome back. This is Forgo, and today we have the arrival of Immortal Victor. And this is the first dungeon that showed up in KOF, and it's actually the easiest dungeon of them all. The most important thing you need to remember about Immortal Victor is that you want to make sure that you have a bleeding character on your first team. The second team, it doesn't really matter, but the first team, you want to make sure you have a bleeding character so you can do more damage to this boss. And green will have the type advantage against this guy, and purple will have the disadvantage. Now, one of the things that makes this the easiest boss of them all is if you go into the card sets, go into our set cards here, scroll down, and if we find the Rio set, if I can find it really quick here, there we are. This set right here is one of the reasons why this is the easiest dungeon of them all. We have a card set that's available in the game that actually can give you extra PG. This obtain 2% power actually works against the Immortal Victor, and it's the only dungeon that this card set works against. All the other Immortal dungeons, Immortal Vulcan, Immortal Nyx, Immortal Most, Immortal Typhon, all of these Immortal dungeons, this card set doesn't work, unfortunately. You need PG rate, not obtain PG, PG rate, in order to really gain your PG, which is why PG rate leaderships are so important for the other Immortal dungeons, except for maybe Immortal Vulcan on the first team. You really want to apply as much damage as you can on that, but on a lot of the others, you kind of want to have your PG rate leaderships. So this really helps a lot, knowing that you have a card set that is available in the game. But the beautiful thing about the Immortal Victor is you really don't need that card set either. I mean, in all honesty, I never ever use that card set. But then again, I am a whale. I do have all the BS characters. I do have them at level 50, and now we got Geese, who's actually a green. And I told you all that I was going to make a Immortal dungeon guide for each of these Immortal dungeons. So let's take a look at that. So this is the Immortal dungeon guide, and so far I've made a guide for Victor and Vulcan. Now Vulcan, I actually need to redo all of this because I think it's way overcomplicated. I think this is much more difficult to understand than the one that I've developed for Immortal Victor. I did get some comments from the last video that I did on these Immortal dungeon guides in order to try to make this simpler, right? And I think this is much more simple. I mean, you see we have the note, purple has a disadvantage up in the top, first and second teams, there's not a whole lot of extra columns here. You have the leaderships, and I know my head's kind of in the way right now, but you got the leaderships, the BS Geese, and if you go straight across, these leaderships will apply to all these characters to the right of them, which makes things pretty easy for you. And again, you need bleed characters on the first team, so I got bleed characters, first team in quotation marks, to let you know all the bleed characters that you can use with that leadership, and then your supports that you can use along with the leadership and the bleed characters on your first team. And you can easily set up second teams using these same types of teams. For example, if I was to use BS Geese and Ginnets and say Mai on the first team, then on the second team, I could easily use Jeanette, Nakaruru, Shane. I could use Jeanette, Meliodas, Swimsuit Mary, and so on the second team, which is pretty great. Remember, green has the type advantage against this boss, so you're going to do a lot more damage. You're going to take a lot less damage from the boss, which is actually very nice. That's going to help your survivability and, of course, the amount of damage that you're going to do. And, these aren't really in a specific order, but something you might notice here that's actually pretty cool is if you are using Nightmare Geese and you have Geese 14 leveled up and you have Ginnets or one of these characters here, you might be able to do a complete solo with that team. And I almost bet money you could, because Geese 14 doesn't even have a type disadvantage against Immortal Victor. He's a red. And if you have his 3PG along with Nightmare Geese 3PG, right? You got Nightmare Geese's 3PG on both of the characters, and then you're using Ginnets or Meliodas or The Rock or Haramaru. I imagine you'd probably be able to solo this boss with that team. And you're not even going to need the Rio set. I really don't think you're going to need the Rio set at all. I've done plenty of clears without it, and I do have a whale account. I understand that. But if you're having trouble and you need to build up those PGs a little bit faster, then having the Rio set would be nice. This is actually pretty cool with Nightmare Geese because he actually does have a PG rate leadership that applies to all attack type fighters. And then we scroll down a little bit, and BS Rochi again has a PG rate leadership that goes along with all of these fighters right here, right? You got, this is OP right here, right? This is just OP as hell. And then you have Jeanette. And you can use, like I said, you can use these other teams for your second teams. Just make sure your first team has one of these bleeding characters on it. But you could always put, as long as you got a bleeding character on the first team, you could always have a bleeding character on the second team. It really doesn't matter. The most important thing is to make sure that your teams have synergy. That's the most important thing that you want to do whenever you're trying to set up your teams. And if you scroll down here, I mean, you can see Ash here. Not the greatest leadership, but he does have a PG rate leadership, and he does apply to green. I mean, if your green fighters to level up, I mean, seriously, if you have BS Geese on that team because that long 3 PG, or Katsura, right? We'll see how Lim plays out. I don't have his 5 PG yet, although a lot of us already have the character. I'll be talking about him in another video. And, you have Nakaruru. I mean, really the best characters are going to be Shane, Geese, Genitz, and Meliodas, in all honesty, when it comes to this team. Katsura is actually quite good, too. And then you have, Merlin here, who is, I mean, Merlin, again, I mean, she has bleed, guys. She has bleed. She has multiple dot effects on her third skill. So you could have her, and then you could have Meliodas, the free character that we all got from the 7 Deadly Sins banner, along with one of these characters. Now, and Elizabeth here was one of the free characters. So as long as you got their 3 PGs for these 2 characters, you're in good shape. You're in excellent shape if you have Merlin. That team could solo Immortal Victor. A lot of these teams could solo Immortal Victor, especially if they're built up. Then you got a red team here. You got Kay with Rock and Haramaru, right? And then you have, Karate, Mai, Shane. I mean, this is insane OP teams. Yeah, this team isn't going to have the type advantage, but they're still going to do insanely well. They're still going to do insanely well. You could even set them up for the second team. You could set for the second team, you could have Karate, you could have Kay, Karate, and Mai. That's OP. Really, any 3 of these characters is OP, especially with Kay's leadership with that 20% PG rate. Maisie has 40% PG rate if you have her first stone just by herself without a PG rate leadership. Yeah, think about that. That's crazy. And then, of course, I got Nightmare Geese in leadership. He does have a 15% PG rate leadership that applies to red fighters and plus an attack buff. And you got Rock, Haramaru, and then, of course, the 3 red characters. And Pretty Zero here, there are no bleeding Fest characters. Her leadership only applies to Fest characters. Only applies to Nest characters. Got my words mixed up there a little bit. But only applies to Nest characters. There's no bleeding character that's a Nest character currently in the game. But you could put any one of these bleeding characters, and they're not going to benefit from her leadership, but they are going to apply bleed. If you want to put them on the first team, you could always put it on the second team too, where you don't need bleed. And then you could just have, these 2 of these characters. If you put this team on the second team, say you put Pretty Zero with Nameless and BS Crizzlet. BS Crizzlet has 30% PG rate. Nameless has 15% PG rate, and if you have a PG stone on him, yeah, and he still builds up his PG from his core against Immortal Victor. Yeah, he has an insanely long 3 PG, so it'll be crazy. Even Zero there is going to do really well because he has 30% PG rate in his core. So you can do really well with this team on the first team if you have one of these bleeding characters on the first team, or if you just set up a second team just of Nest fighters who can all benefit from that PG rate leadership that Pretty Z has. You got the blue team here with Dellins, and you could even set up the first team with Dellins, Merlin, because she does deal bleeding damage. Rugal does have bleed, but he doesn't have a lasting dot effect. He has touch dot, is what I like to call it, where he hits the opponent, he'll apply bleed for about a second, and then it goes away. It isn't a lasting dot effect. I prefer to use a lasting dot effect against the Immortal Victor. It's going to allow you to do a lot more damage that way. But Merlin does have a lasting dot effect. So you could actually put Merlin in the leadership, and then one of these bleeding characters, these guys have bleed also. Pretty crazy that the Rock here that we actually got for free way back in the day from the WWE collab actually has bleed. He has super armor. He has a skill that can't be interrupted, the super armor skill. And if you have his 3 PG, that insanely long 3 PG, yeah, I might actually try that. I'm actually curious to see how well that would do. I think that's crazy. And then you have The Rock. And I did put any bleed character, but you don't need it because The Rock actually has leadership. The Rock and Rugal have those leaderships that apply to all fighters. There's no PG rate, but again, against Immortal Victor, especially if you're using those Rio cards that I showed you earlier, you really don't need it. The Rio cards, if you just have one set of those cards on one of your characters, and I might even put that in this guide, you're going to do really well because the set actually can help you obtain PG on your other characters. It's not just for the character you're playing, it's for all of your characters, which is pretty insane. And if you have the Tekken set, of course, that's just an amazing set for this boss, but only this boss. And then you got the yellow team with King in the leadership, and then, you know, we can even use Okita. Okita actually has bleed, believe it or not, so you could actually use King with Okita, have your bleeding character, and then these two guys for your yellow. You could even put Rudy in here. Maybe I'll go ahead and add Rudy from the Seven Knights. He's actually a defensive character, and he has a long 3BG. I could probably put him on there as well. Notice I have any support here, because as long as you have a bleeding character, really you don't even need bleed for a rock because he already has bleed. You just put any support. So any one of these supports are going to benefit from these leaderships. That's the kind of thing, because they're all attack leaderships. So that concludes the Immortal Victor guide. Let me know if you guys like the way that I've done this better than the Immortal Vulcan here. Let me know if you prefer the new method that I'm doing instead of this method here, because I do think it's actually better. I think it's a lot less complicated and much easier to understand for newer players. And I also noticed that in my last video that I did for the Immortal Dungeons, some people were trying to ask for requests to be able to see this guide, and you really shouldn't need it. As you can see, anyone who has the link can access, no sign-in required. So I don't know why anybody's needing to sign in to be able to look at this. I have it set up to where you should be able to just click on the link and check it out. So I would ask you all to join my Discord. The link will be in the description below, because I will have this posted up in the Discord. I'll just have like a picture of it, so you don't even have to click on a link. And the same for the Immortal Vulcan guide. And I do stream on Twitch at 9 p.m. GMT plus 7 time. The link will be in the description below. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Y'all take care and have a good one. See ya.